Hi, and welcome to Life Masters. I'm Tanya Memi. Today we have Jarratt Carson on the show. Now, I've known Jarratt for many, many years. He is a 4-time Emmy-winning executive producer, and that was for Amazing Race.
Yes.
You were on the show for how many years?
I was on the show for 6 years.
6.
10 seasons.
I know, and I went to the Emmys with you a couple of times too when you won.
We did. We were there when I won my second Emmy, I believe.
Yeah, the one thing I know about that is like when you win an Emmy night, you literally can walk into anywhere in LA, in Beverly Hills, in Hollywood to get into any party. You just stand there with your Emmy, they're like, you in.
and walk away with the gift bags.
Oh, I know. They're giant gift bags with so much stuff in. Aren't these? Isn't there thousands and thousands of dollars worth?
Some of them are big gifts. Big gifts.
Like television screens. I remember one year, I think you
television screens, but they have like a lot of vendors will sponsor these parties, and so they just throw a bunch of their stuff in the bags. Especially works well for women. They walk away with a lot of goodies.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember when I was on Sell This House, I had bags and bags of stuff. But anyway,
but the year we went, one of the parties was in downtown LA at the music hall.
It was.
Duran was there.
And I will never forget it.
That was fun.
You introduced me to so many celebrities. I couldn't believe it. Hollywood is like nothing for you. You're just.
I don't know about that. the Emmy attracts people.
It really does.
When you go to these parties, what did you win for, and talk about it.
Yeah, it's very powerful. So now you have 4 of them.
I do.
Where are they sitting in your house?
They're in my home office.
Is that where they are?
That's where they are.
Just on a beautiful shelf?
Yep, on a beautiful shelf sitting there. They're collecting dust. It's been a while.
Well, I know
I'm due for another one.
Yes, exactly. It's time, right?
Yeah.
I know that you have an incredible story, and I want to go back to how did you know you were going to come to Hollywood, and how many years later you win 4? I mean, so few people have even won 1 Emmy, you know?
Well, I mean, it helps when you're on a successful show.
Yes.
Obviously, but getting there is another story. Getting on a successful show isn't the easiest thing to do.
So what were you like when you were a little kid? You're like, here I am.
When I was a little kid, I was really into photography. My parents got me a camera when I was like 8 years old, and I would just set up things around the house and take pictures, and then I learned to develop my own photographs. So I had a very visual sense to myself.
Off the bat.
I had a good eye, I think. And then when I was 19 years old, I told my parents, this is what I want to do. I want to go out and I want to get to creative arts. I want to get into movies is what my first passion was when I was a kid. But it all stemmed from a love of photography.
Nice. And so how did they feel when you said, okay, I love photography, but I want to...
They didn't want me to go.
No, right?
No, my dad, I grew up in a pretty conservative household in South Texas. And my dad went to UT. He was an athlete. My mother was, from that generation, she was a mom. She didn't work. She didn't want me to leave the nest. So
what was it like for you when you left the nest and here you are, you're venturing out?
When you're 19, you don't know a lot about the world, but and that's probably a good thing. And you're fearless. So fearless. So for me, it was like going into battle. You don't know enough about life to know what you're really getting into. So I didn't care. I had no fear whatsoever. So I packed up my '78 Cutlass Supreme with everything I owned, and my father and I drove out.
And where did you land? Where was your first?
First of all, he wouldn't let me drive. He refused to let me drive. So we drove like 55 from South Texas all the way to LA.
Aww.
And it was maddening, but we got through it. And the car broke down on the way in El Centro, California. We get here and it's like 110 in the valley. And my dad's like, what in the hell are you doing?
So you ended up in the valley.
Ended up in the valley.
Okay, and then what? I mean, what was that whole journey like?
I rented a room from a divorcee woman who had a kid who was like a year older than me. And so that was insane. I mean, my first couple of months here was literally like out of a scripted film.
Well, I want to hear about it.
I didn't know anyone, first of all, so and I didn't know what to do. I had maybe $1,000 in my bank, and so I had to get a job. So my dad, says, okay, well, I'll get you started. I'll pay for your rent for the first couple of months, but then you're on your own. And so the wild adventure started the day I took him to the airport to send him back home to Texas. And he said, okay, here's some money to get you through the first week. So he gives me $100. I leave LAX and I'm on Century Boulevard and a block from the airport, and the car breaks down. and I coast into a 76 station, and the guy, and I'm like, well, what the hell happened to my car? And he's like, well, let me take a look. He takes a look at it. You need a new battery. How much are they? With tax, $97.50.
There goes your $100.
So my $100 is gone in the first 5 minutes that I'm here. So then I'm just looking for a job, and I interview for, you know, whatever. I'm 19 years old, and I get the job. I get a job first day on the job as a manager of a video store in North Hollywood, a mom and pop video store that's owned by this guy, and he's got a Chinese restaurant on one side and a 7-Eleven on the other. First day on the job, we go in and we're getting towards closing hours around 9 o'clock, and like 5 till, there's 3 guys still in the store. And he had already locked the door not to let anyone else new in, and he said, "Okay, guys, you got to get your stuff because we're going to be closing up." And he goes to unlock the door. 2 of the guys pull out knives. Another guy, I turned to him to a gun in my face.
This was your first day on the job.
My first day on the job. My first week in LA.
Oh my goodness, you must have been just. I mean,
it was insane.
Yes.
I mean, so. To make a long story short, we're taken to the back, we're taped, gagged, feet taped, gagged around the mouth, and I'm laying.
Are you serious? This is like you're right. This is like
I'm 19 years old.
movie.
I'm lying on the floor, looking at this other guy working there, and I'm thinking, I'm gonna die because they threatened to kill us.
Yeah.
And they're hauling out VCRs and TVs into their van right like at 9 o'clock, right next to a 7-Eleven and a Chinese restaurant.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
And he's going through my wallet. I got $3 on me, and you know, tons of profanity. I won't say it here, but they're threatening to kill us. And then they trip an alarm, and then they really start to panic. And so they untie the owner, and he shuts the alarm off. They get out of there, and then the owner of the place calls the police. They show up because it was an armed robbery at that point. Before it was just a burglary. So you know that happens like every 3 seconds in LA. So the cops get there and they're interviewing us. One guy is like completely freaked out. I'm just kind of in shock.
Yeah, you're just like, I've heard these stories.
But again, just that kind of that 19-year-old mentality. You don't. I mean, I didn't really know what to think at the time. I just knew that I couldn't believe it was happening, really.
Yes. So what made you even want to stay in LA?
Well, the police officer, and this is where and this is one thing I learned about my career. You look at moments in your life that have meaning, that have a purpose, if you recognize them at the time, you can make a lot out of them. So he interviews me, and like 5 minutes into the conversation, he's like, "You're not from here, are you?" And I said, "No, I've been here a week."
So they just knew. They knew.
And he's like, "Welcome to LA."
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And so then at the end of the you know, of them talking to us and taking the report, my car was like parked down the street. So I'm like, "Hey, do you mind walking me to my car?"
You think, right? Yeah. You're asking a cop to walk you to the car.
Yeah, because, you know,
I would do.
Again, so he's like, "Oh, no problem." So he walks me out and he's like, "So what are you here for?" And I tell him, "Well, you know, I came out here to go to film school. I don't really know what I'm going to do, but I know what I want to be out here. This is what I want to do. I want to be in TV and movies." And he said, "Well, I've been doing this for 30 years, been a cop for 30 years in this town. I've never, ever seen anything like this happen to someone so young."
I mean, that is a lot for a cop in LA to say that.
Yeah. And he says, "Don't go home. I know you're thinking that, and I know your parents will drag you home.
Wow.
Don't leave.
Nice.
Came out here for a reason. Don't go home." And again, like you say, what cop would say that? But I mean, obviously there are decent people who are police officers who would do that. But for him to take that, at the moment, I immediately got it. So I go home, and then something else goes home. So I drive all the way back to Chatsworth into my divorcee's one room that I'm renting. And I have a cousin who's in the Marines. He's a pilot. He had just been stationed in El Toro, and he knew I had just moved here. So he decided to drive up and surprise me. So 1 o'clock in the morning that same night, there's a knock on my door, and it's him. And we're like brothers.
So you still haven't really even been there you've been there for a week or a few days.
Been there for a week.
Okay.
And so a family member during this super traumatic event that I've just experienced shows up at my door. So there's the emotional support. There's the family backing that I kind of needed. So then it was just like, okay, there's no way in hell I'm leaving.
You were taking in the signs. People say that there's signs in their life.
There's signs in life, and I've always recognized that in my career. Not just that was a personal one, but you see those moments in your professional career. And I've always had a good instinct for that sort of thing, and recognize that. And that's pretty much what led me to being successful, is having that kind of mentality in the moment, recognizing those moments, and making the best of them.
So how do you know, like with that philosophy in mind, how do you know when it's a real moment or when it's,
I think it's just gut. I think it's just trusting your gut. I've always had a sense for that.
So tell me a little more about that. Like, how do you know when your gut is not fooling you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have a hard time with that. So,
well, I mean, sometimes your instincts can be wrong, but if you flip that and realize that, okay, I've learned something from that bad decision, I'm either not going to make that decision again, or I'm going to use that decision to catapult me into a different direction.
Well, that's very
you know what
true.
I mean?
Yeah,
so
totally.
it's not like, it's like you learn more from your failures than you do your successes, because you're learning something more, I would think, from a failure than you would from a success. Because if you're a success, everything's like, you're the hero, you're the big.
Oh yeah.
You know
totally.
what I mean? You're
Yes.
getting that attention because you've succeeded at something. Whereas a failure, it's like, hey man, this is what you did wrong, and this is why. What do you take from that?
Yeah, it's true. What would you say is one of the best decisions you've ever made in your career? That's really...
Well, I think it came when I was working on it, and my story then from there, it goes through, I was out here, that whole thing happened to me. I had the story goes on, by the way.
Oh, great. Continue then. I would love to hear it.
Maybe I'll backtrack to that.
Let's do that. Yeah.
But I had half a dozen more ridiculous, stupid jobs.
Like what? So you get past this, your cousin comes to town.
So again, stupid decisions by a 19-year-old. The second dumb decision was, but again, you grow from that, selling encyclopedias door to door.
Okay, that's
for 3 months.
I love it.
And
what did you? I mean, okay, so it was
horrible. It was the worst. It was terrible. But I was just trying to make money and get hired doing something. They sell this to you. You know what I learned from that guy that job? This guy who sold me on the job was like the best salesman I'd ever seen. And he comes in and he sells you on what you're going to be doing. I'm like, oh, I can do that. But this guy was like a master salesman.
Right.
So, but try going out.
It's a skill.
But it's a skill. It's a real skill.
And I know that you
one
sell
that I don't
shows
necessarily
too,
possess, at least in that regard. Anyway, but I just learned something about presentations at that point. Like, it's not so much about the product; it's about how you talk about it
and how you sell it.
Right.
Right.
So you could have a crap project, but if you sell it, then you're a hero.
Then you're a hero, and that's successful. A skill that you've brought into the rest of your career too.
Into selling a show or selling
an
idea or selling an idea about the show you're on and doing that. But there was one moment in my career when I worked in feature films for a long time. I worked for TriStar and Columbia Pictures, for big studio executives, and so I really cut my teeth on learning, the vicious, hardcore side of the business, the A-list, the dog-eat-dog world of kill or be killed mentality.
It really is that bad. I know.
It is. And a nice guy from Texas, you have to a little bit adopt some of that mindset, adopt some of that way of doing things. And I can be when you need to be.
So what happened, the transition from you're selling encyclopedias, you were doing whatever jobs you could,
that ended,
how did you get your first?
Well, that ended when I was sitting in a giant condominium complex in the pouring rain, literally reduced to tears, like, what the F am I doing?
Yeah.
Why did I come here? I didn't come here for this. So, but it was really when I get accepted into USC Film School that things changed for me. And that's a very competitive school. They take, 24 students out of thousands of applicants every year, and I got in.
Nice.
And my father didn't think I would. So he was, and when you have a doubter in your life, and it wasn't, I don't think he did it because he didn't think I was didn't have the ability. He's just trying to be, he was a realist.
Right.
So it came from that place, not some more
He doesn't want your heart to be totally broken.
Right. But I said, well, without risk, there's no reward. So when I got the acceptance letter, I sent it to him, and I got in, and then that really was a springboard for me after that. And then you gain confidence from that sort of thing, and you learn about yourself, you learn who you are as a producer or a filmmaker or whatever pursuit you have in this business. And I think the one thing that I learned is once you know what you're good at, pursue that rather than pursue something you're just okay at.
Yeah, something that maybe, it's interesting because, now I've interviewed quite a few life masters on the show.
Right.
And they have all said that exact same thing. Do what you're good at.
Right. And I think, because I was a writer for some point, at one point in my career, and that was okay. I mean, I had some success. But I knew right then, I'm not going to compete with some of these other writers.
Right.
They're just so much more talented than I am. And it's okay to say, all right, I'm not the best at that, but I am good at this.
So then what happens after that? You know what you're good at, you graduate from school, and then what was like one of the very first?
The first job I had was an intern for Wendy Feinerman, and she ended up producing Forrest Gump. And from there, so I read scripts for her. And the first script that I read that got me the job was the Forrest Gump script, like 3 years before it was made.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Do you have that script still?
I do.
Oh,
and it was an amazing script by the writer Eric Roth. And and I read it, and this was 3 years before Tom Hanks was attached, before Zemeckis was attached to direct.
Okay, that's very cool.
And
you don't even know what you were getting into at the time.
Well, it was just a brilliant script. And
Yeah,
it was in development with her, and I said, this is amazing. And I gave my coverage on it, your synopsis and evaluation of the script, and I got that job as an intern. But she introduced me to a lot of people. I had a good relationship with her. And
so
she introduced me to Stacy Snyder, who at the time was president of Goober Peters, which is John Peters and Peter Goober, who were, legends in this business.
They are, yes.
So I got this interview with her, with Stacy, who went on to be a very successful, powerful woman in the business. And I was interviewing to be her assistant. And this is another thing. These moments in your life when you make a decision to do something. And I was interviewing for her assistant, and she said, well, I'm meeting with other people. And I said, no, you're not. You're hiring me. I'm not leaving this room until you say I have the job. And she laughed. She goes, no, I can't do that. And I go, well, then introduce me to someone else here.
That's awesome that you did that.
And she did. And the story is that the assistant that was working for her VP, Alan Rich, his assistant was moving up to her slot.
Yeah.
So his slot became available.
And then
sure enough, I got the job.
Nice. And how old were you at this time?
25, 26.
25. I mean, that is a big deal at 25, 26. And then so let's move forward to the Amazing Race. You get on the show.
So the point for that part, and we could talk for hours, but so I have so many war stories. But I worked in features for a long time, and then I wanted to be an independent producer. So, and this was after I worked for TNT long form for a few years. And so I went out and I acquired some material. I acquired a book and a few scripts, and I went out and I tried to do that, which is a very tough road to hoe. Especially the time the business was changing. They really weren't paying development fees to producers because the script market was changing, and so it just was a different landscape. So I called a friend of mine who was working in unscripted TV. He was a line producer, and he said, "Well, Tony Scott is doing a show, and Tony Scott obviously is the big action director.
Yes, wow.
Who passed away sadly. Anyway, he's doing a show which is essentially the reality version of Top Gun. So when I met with him, and he said, well, come in and meet. Same thing here, like years before. I met this girl, and she was the senior producer, and she goes, well, I really like you. Why don't you meet this other guy, a guy named Larry Barron, who is still a very good friend of mine. I went in and met with him, and he goes, when can you start? I go, now.
Tomorrow, yeah, today.
I started that day of the interview. So you have episode 5.
Okay, I feel like you've been very charmed, Jarratt.
I guess. I don't know.
My career did not go that smooth.
But the person I worked for was Jennifer Bresnan, who went on to run CBS years later.
Of course, yes. And then that's how The Amazing Race came about.
No, what happened was I worked with her. She was the producer. I was her associate producer. No, yeah, but she didn't like her AP, so her story editor, so she removed him and bumped me up.
Right.
So I did that show, and that was pretty much what led to Race, because I met some people there. And well, before that, I heard about this show called Profiles from the Front Line, and Bruckheimer did The Amazing Race, and he was doing this other show that was getting a lot of attention at the time called Profiles from the Front Line with ABC and Bruckheimer.
I think I remember that, yeah.
And I said, I want to do that. I want to do that show. So I persisted and ended up getting that. So that's how I got in with Bruckheimer and Jonathan Littman. And I met a few guys there, one guy who had produced Race, and I went up and did another show. And he called me and he said, hey, there's a spot over here at Amazing Race. Do you want to come interview for it? And I did. And I'd already met with Bert, because I did with Bertram Ben Munster, the creator of Race. And that's how I got Race.
So one last thing I wanted to ask you, what would you say out there to people that are starting in this business? Because it seems like you just didn't take no for an answer. And you also look for
I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it. And the one thing I took about it is I always trusted my gut.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid of failure, because it's going to happen. It's happened to me more time than my successes. And since Race, it's, I've been off that show for 5 years, and you just have to be persistent. And you have to not give up. And if it's what you want to do,
keep going and
just trust your instincts.
Okay. And so that's it. That's awesome. I love that. I could be talking to you for hours. I know that we just scraped the surface, but maybe you'll have to come in again. We'll have to hear the second part of your
part two.
Right?
Because there's a whole other story.
A whole other aspect to it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I would love that. All right. Well, Jarratt Carson here again.
Thank you.
Amazing Race, 4-time Emmy award-winning executive producer. And if you want to hear his story over and over and over again, which I hope you do, listen to Life Masters on EverTalk TV, which is on Apple TV and also on iTunes. You can listen to the podcast. So there you go. Thanks, Jarratt.
All right.
Until next time.
All right.
Life Masters.